In this section, we'll look at how prohibition of alcohol played out in the 1920s. Prohibition, of course, is probably the best example of the cultural conflict in the decade. Some people were saying repeal it since it was outdated and not working, and others were saying no, keep it and just enforce it better. When the 18th Amendment took effect in January 1920, prohibitionists rejoiced. Said one evangelist, Billy Sunday, quote, "The reign of tears is over. The slums will soon be only a memory. We will turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk upright now. Women will smile and children will laugh." At first, it even seemed that such predictions were perhaps going to come true. Saloons closed, arrests for drunkenness dwindled, and in 1921, alcohol consumption stood at about a third its pre-war level, which was pretty impressive decline. But then things went wrong. The conservative financial philosophy that was dominant meant that government was reluctant to spend a lot of money on the issue. And in the Prohibition Bureau of the Treasury Department, which was the chief enforcement agency, there were only just over 1,500 agents in 1920 and still under 3,000 in 1930, and that's for the whole country. There is, as a result of the lack of really funding, enforcement was spasmodic and ineffective. And as we'll see, there was so much money to be made in Prohibition. There was a lot of illegality and corruption as well. There were many people who really resisted Prohibition, and it wasn't just the young, although it's been said that by making it illegal, it made it more attractive to young people. It was also a number of ethnic immigrants in the cities where alcohol was part of their culture. For example, wine with the Italians or beer with the Germans. People spoke of an inalienable right to drink. And, the war had removed the optimism of many people. It was, they tied in with the shrinking government regulation, and people just wanted to have fun. And so alcohol kind of fit in with that. And many people said it was just an outdated law. And without many federal employees enforcing it, without the Treasury Department agents being numerous, enforcement fell to the cities and the states. And in many of those states where, in the North, where there wasn't a lot of religious support for Prohibition, the enforcement was too weak, and it was very common to have people drinking. It was increasingly common to have people brew their own alcohol. Soon new organizations formed, for example, the Association Against the Prohibition Amendment. We've already mentioned Al Smith as a Democratic presidential candidate in 1928. He was involved with that. People began to brew their own, and they would often put it in flasks, which was a new way to hide the alcohol. They'd strap it to their leg, and they became known as bootleggers, hiding the liquor in their boot and their leg. You're going to see people have illegal bars called speakeasies. You got to speak easy about it instead of the saloons with the big signs, sort of the forerunners of the cocktail lounge. There'd be passwords and hip flask and, just way of hiding it. All of this kind of makes, alcohol very competitive. As a result, there is the growth of an underworld. Where there is a demand, there will be a supply, and this is illegal, and so you begin to see violent gangs take over. There had been numerous ethnic gangs that would run prostitution and gambling and extortion, and Prohibition was in many senses a new business for them, a boon for them. The bootleggers were not just people that were brewing their own liquor up in the still in the hills. They were also bringing in wine and a lot of these people that wanted to drink were in the New England cities anyway. So there's a lot of money there. Whenever there's money, there is going to be people supplying it, and it's so competitive that these gangs would wage war on each other to control the illegal trade. And the machine guns have advanced enough to where you could have a Tommy gun, and you and you could wear it. You could hide your gun in your overcoat and pull your hat down low, and people couldn't even recognize you. One of the more famous bootlegger gangsters was Chicago's Alphonse or Al Capone. In 1920, Capone was like a junior apprentice gangster in New York City. And with Prohibition, he moved to Chicago and found the industry he'd been looking for. You know, Chicago's perfect because it's on the water, and Canada didn't have Prohibition. You could bring it in from the water, and it's on the railroads, which you could dispense it pretty quickly to the rest of America. And so soon he had his own gang with over 1,000 men, machine gun armed, and they were earning close to $60 million a year by 1927. And most of what they made was brought in was simply beer. And, so with so much money there, that he'd often be very, very brutal to competitors. And he killed, has been estimated, up to 250 people between 1920 and 1927 who were trying to muscle in on his business. The most impressive violence was the famous Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Posing as police, Capone's men killed 7 of their rival O'Banahan family. In all, over 500 gang-related murders in Chicago took place. More spectacular in other cities, but still characteristic of many of the large cities. Capone was smart enough not to get busted for his major crimes, but he was nevertheless eventually busted. Everybody knew what Capone was doing, but Capone was smart enough, as I say, not to have alcohol on him, and he contributed to charities, and not everybody disliked him. It took one Treasury agent, Elliot Ness, to ultimately bring Capone down. What Ness did was he got a hold of Capone's bookkeeper, and he sort of squeezed him, and in the end, Ness couldn't prove that Capone had committed murder. He couldn't prove that Capone had violated the Volstead Act, but he could prove that Capone hadn't paid his taxes adequately. And so it's kind of funny in a way, but Capone went to prison for tax evasion, and he went to, among the places he was there was in Alcatraz in San Francisco Harbor. But Capone ultimately died in prison of syphilis. Elliot Ness and his battle with Capone's been famous in Hollywood, the movies, for a long time. You can see it in movies like The Top Here, Robert Stack playing Elliot Ness, and The Bottom in the 1980s movies, Untouchables. Elliot Ness was played by Kevin Costner. This concludes the section on Prohibition in the 1920s.